corporate wrongdoing. Ricky Ott and others have drafted a 28th Amendment to the Constitution that would strip corporations of their personhood, subjecting them to the same oversight that existed for the first 100 years of U.S. history. With the global economic meltdown and welling public outrage over the excesses of executives at AIG as well as over other bailout beneficiaries, now just might be the time to expand public engagement over the imbalance of power between people and corporations that has undermined our democracy. And I think back to what happened here in Seattle 10 years ago, right, to the Battle of Seattle. I asked Paul Krugman about this, the Nobel Prize-winning economist on Democracy Now! A few days ago. He was a big supporter of NAFTA, and I asked if he's changed his views. He's so important in analyzing what's happening in the economy today. But around the issue of NAFTA, think about the warning that, and maybe it was many of you who were out on the streets 10 years ago. The warning that was sounded for people all over this country and around the world by the kids in the streets right here. High school kids, college kids, older folks, union leaders, environmentalists, doctors, nurses, people who were recognizing 10 years ago, not under Bush, under President Clinton, what does unbridled power of corporations globalizing with each other mean for all of us regular folks? What does it mean? Raising a huge question. It didn't have to be in Seattle. It's not that Seattle represented something special. Of course, it was the largest export city in the United States, but it was that the WTO was here. And so Seattle was the scene of this. It is remarkable to reflect back, and especially in this 10th anniversary that's coming up, to look at how omniscient, how prophetic people were 10 years ago when you look at the global economic meltdown today. These protests make an enormous difference. They make, well, just reading in the paper today also what's happening with the G20 that is taking place and the massive protests that are taking place through Europe. You can be sure on Democracy Now! This week you will hear about this, but what it means to stand up and for people to stand up together. My brother David and I have been chronicling ordinary people in this country who don't go looking for trouble, but when it comes to them, people stand up, and what it means for this country. Our second book, Static, we called it Static because in this high-tech digital age with high-definition television and digital radio, still, all we get from the media is static. A veil of distortion and lies and misrepresentations and half-truths that obscure reality, when what we need is the media to give us the dictionary definition of static. Criticism, opposition, unwanted interference. We need a media that covers power, not covers for power. A media that is the fourth estate, not for the state. And we need a media that covers the movements that create static and make history. I think of some of these extraordinary people in this country. One of our chapters is about a group of people you would not want to meet in a dark alley if you had hijacked someone's civil liberties. And they are the librarians of this country. Are there any librarians in the audience? Well, you know what your brothers and sisters did in Connecticut, and I'm sure you're doing all over. But we chronicled this group of librarians in Connecticut who at the height of the Bush years, well, they, like many library systems throughout the country, have a computer system that connects the libraries of a state. Theirs is called the Library Connection. George Christian was the executive director. It was in 2005. He was at his office, and a door knock He heard a knock at the door. He opened the door. It was 2 FBI agents, and they handed him an NSL, a national security letter. Opening one of those is like being exposed to radioactivity. You're not allowed to mention to anyone you have received it. It was demanding information about patrons who had used the computer system in the library at a certain time and place. He read the letter, he looked up at the FBI agents, and he said, "I believe this is unconstitutional." They handed him their cards, looked at him pityingly like a predator sizing up his prey, and they left. He closed the door, and this brave librarian crumpled into his chair, and he thought, what am I going to do? He thought, if I'm going to take on the whole US government, I need at least 4 other librarians. And so he called a meeting of the board of the Library Connection. He called them up. He said, "You got to get over here fast. I can't tell you what it's about. Please don't tell anyone where you're going or when you finish what this is about." So among those who came was Peter Chase. He'd just been named vice president of the Library Connection, voluntary position. They had asked him if he'd be vice president. Well, because it's a nice title, and they said he'd serve for a year. It would be no trouble. So he's racing to the office. He's thinking, what on earth is the problem? And he thinks, did someone not return a library book? Did someone misfile an adult book in the children's section? He gets there, they're with their lawyer, they open the letter, and in so doing, they are all exposed. They can't tell partner, boss, colleague, on pain of 5 years in prison. And they all look at this and they decide they're going to sue the US government over the USA Patriot Act. This meant they lost their name. They couldn't say they had been muzzled. They could no longer participate in the debates over the USA Patriot Act, which was a very big problem because the Congress was weighing whether to reaffirm the USA Patriot Act, which they did. But they felt it had to be done, even as the Bush administration was saying librarians were not being served with national security letters. It looks like over 150,000 people, probably well over 200,000 in this country, have been served with these. When the case went to a Bridgeport court, they weren't allowed